Hi, welcome to today's webinar on informational interviews, what, how, and why. So I have 3 o'clock on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But can you all just let me know by sending yes or no via the questions box that you can all hear me okay and that you can see my screen. So if just a few of you can quickly reply and let me know, then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great. So it seems like you all can hear me and can see my screen. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So as means of an introduction, my name is Amanda Dumsch-Langer, and I am a career counselor in the Office of Intramural Training and Education. And I've been working at the NIH for cumulatively about 6 years now. And so I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different trainees, postdocs, grad students, and postdocs during my time at OITE. And I'm hoping that the tips and information that I share with you all today about networking and specifically about informational interviews will be of help to you. So the format of how we're going to structure this is have about 30 to 40 minutes of a presentation and some slides that I'm going to go through. And then I'm going to kind of open it up to any questions that you all have. Feel free to send me questions via the question box on the webinar. I'm not going to be able to check them as I'm going through the presentation, but at the end, I'm going to do my best to go through and answer as many questions as I can. And if I don't get to your question, the questions are saved and sent to us, so I will try to follow up with you accordingly. For the time being, for the webinar, everyone is going to be muted, and the chat function has actually been disabled, so you're only able to send questions to me via the question box. So just keep that in mind. And just so you know, all of these slides and actually the link to this recording will be available for you after the presentation, and so you should have access to it as well. Okay, so with all of the housekeeping items taken care of, why don't we go ahead and get started? So the very first topic, the title is Informational Interviews, What, How, Why, but I'm really going to kind of focus on the last question first and foremost. And so why do informational interviews? Why is this an important part of sort of your career development process overall, and specifically with your job search as well? And really, the main answer to this question is that it's really an important networking tool for you. I'm sorry, the slides seem to be jumping all over for just a moment. So the informational interviews is considered a networking tool. And why is it important for you to network, generally speaking? So I know that this is something that you probably hear a lot during your job search, but it is still all very true. Networking really does allow you to tap into the hidden job market. And so many people think, oh, all jobs are supposed to be advertised online. It's legally required for positions to be posted. And in an ideal world, that is true, but there are still jobs that sort of exist just in the mind of a hiring manager, and they have yet to kind of go through all the steps in order to post. And networking and having these conversations allows you to really tap into that hidden job market. And to really establish an edge on the competition, and within that to be kind of informed about the job market. And I think especially now, given sort of the uncertainty of the times that we're living in and how COVID-19 is going to kind of impact the economy and the job market overall, I think it's really important to be doing informational interviews, as many as possible, to kind of stay abreast of the trends and to hear what companies are doing, who's hiring, who has a hiring freeze, who's laying people off, and that's going to really help inform your decisions on which agencies or which organizations you should be targeting. And in terms of establishing an edge on the competition, as you're going to see in sort of the questions that I encourage you to ask within an informational interview, sometimes you get really good intel and kind of insider information about how you should be creating your job search documents, what specific skills you should be highlighting for certain roles. And just by virtue of going through and having conversations with people who are working in a field that's of interest to you, and by doing informational interviews, you're gaining visibility for future openings, and people are more likely to kind of keep you in mind and to keep you notified about future openings within organizations. And gaining referrals through company networks. Now, this is something that even as recently as a few years ago, we used to tell people to be really cautious about directly asking for referrals. It felt like a sort of a forward request, but there's actually quite a lot of incentives for employees who refer candidates, and for those, if those candidates end up getting the position, a lot of times the employee who referred does get a monetary bonus of some kind. So it's, you know, there is a benefit for employees referring you on as well. So depending on the level of your relationship with somebody, I think that's something that you could also very easily ask. And I don't necessarily have data or research that I can point to that shows that somebody who's really proactive and really has taken a strong networking approach within their job search, that they end up having a shorter job search. However, anecdotally speaking, in the hundreds of trainees that I've worked with through the years, I really have seen that the people who tend to put a lot of their focus on the networking aspect of it, on average, I would say it shortens their job search by about 2 months. And I think that this is sort of something that tends to be flipped for a lot of job searchers. A lot of job searchers that I work with really focus on the online postings that you see and going through and kind of hunkering down behind your laptop and, you know, looking at job boards and making sure that your documents are ready to submit. And, you know, I think people who really focus only sort of on the online aspect of it and don't really pay much mind to the networking piece, it ends up being a much longer job search for them overall. And if you're thinking about your job search as sort of a pie chart, I would really encourage you to spend about 70 to 80% of your time networking, because it really does tend to have a larger and a greater payoff in the end. Now, one of the questions that I often hear from trainees that I work with at the NIH is, why do I really need to do an informational interview? I can look online and I can read a lot of occupational information on different websites. A lot of people use the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They put out an occupational outlook handbook every year, which is a very thorough overview based on labor stats and trends from the previous year. A lot of people read a lot of articles on science careers, nature careers, and you know, you can really also, just by reading position descriptions, kind of get a good idea of what might be entailed in a certain role. However, the one thing that I would say is those are all great things to do, but informational interviewing is really a complement to sort of that research that you're doing online. And it really does kind of help allow you to go beyond sort of that basic information and give you a more nuanced and diverse view of what a job is really going to be like, what a field is really going to be like, and how that is going to be ultimately a good fit for you. So definitely, these are lots of reasons why we encourage networking. There really are a lot of benefits to it. So another way to think about networking is that you're really networking for, this is sort of an acronym that I generally use, is AIRS. So advice, information, referrals, and support. So when you're thinking about why do I need to do this, kind of keep that in mind. These are all the reasons why it would be important to. And just generally the support that you can get from your career network is really, really invaluable. And that support can come, you know, at any stage that you're in, whether you're in sort of the career exploration phase, I think doing informational interviews is really beneficial during that. If you're trying to think, oh, I'm trying to think about next steps after graduate school or my training, and I'm thinking about science policy, maybe science writing, whatever it might be. I think that's a great time to do informational interviews and to kind of test out some fields that are of interest to you right now. So it can also be seen as sort of a career exploration tool in order to help you make decisions about where you ultimately want to focus within your job search. I think a lot of people automatically think of informational interviews to go hand in hand with job searching because it is about networking and trying to kind of source new positions and new leads on jobs, but it can also have a very big impact on sort of your career exploration phase. So that's something to bear in mind as you're going through as well. However, with all of the benefits that come with networking, and there are many, I still very frequently hear a lot of resistance to networking. And I think it's something that sometimes seems overwhelming to people, especially if that's something that they haven't necessarily done before. And so a lot of times people will say things, and I'll just put up all of the bullet points now so that you can see them, I don't network because, or I would network if I was an extrovert. So the beliefs that I often hear, and these are sort of some of the main ones, are that networking feels fake and manipulative. It isn't a genuine process. And I can understand kind of where people are coming from in that perspective. However, with networking, and I will add that I think networking is very different across the world. And so at the NIH, I work with scientists from around the world. And I think that there are lots of different cultural norms and expectations around job searching in general, but especially with networking. And so just to sort of normalize this process, if you are applying, if you are hoping to apply to jobs in North America, specifically within the United States, just to kind of normalize networking, it really is a part of job searching and career exploration. If networking feels like you're selling yourself, then you might be coming on a little bit too strong within your approach. So generally the best networking is often kind of asking questions, gathering information. So if you're kind of going into it feeling like you're a salesperson, pitching yourself left and right, then you might be coming on a little bit too strong. I do think that there is an element of being assertive that is really important to have within a job search. But if you feel like that assertiveness is kind of bordering on the side of aggression, then maybe it's time to kind of take a step back. Successful networkers are all extroverted. This is something that I often hear, especially from introverts, or that the best networking happens in large group settings. And I would actually argue the opposite. So some of the most successful networkers that I've ever met have been self-described introverts who really kind of approach this in terms of, I'm going to do a lot of informational interviews. And introverts tend to do well in sort of one-on-one settings. And so I think this is why specifically doing informational interviews as a tool for networking can be a really great way to approach the networking process. I remember I worked with a postdoc at the NIH a few years ago, and he was very hesitant to begin networking and had a lot of reservations about it, felt that it was kind of just awkward and fake, and he didn't really know how to sort of begin that process. And so working with him to kind of help him get started, it actually ended up being something that he really thrived in, and he ended up being probably one of the most prolific informational interviews that I've met. And he did about 50 informational interviews with people around the NIH, and just really actually enjoyed the process. And so something that really was overwhelming, kind of stressful to him in the beginning, ended up being an activity that he actually enjoyed and ended up looking forward to. which was very surprising to him and was very cool for me to see. So networking can be uncomfortable. I do think that it is going to be somewhat dependent on the level of your relationship with the person, how you got connected to the person, and then just generally your rapport. So in some ways, networking is, at the heart of it, it is about relationships and connecting with people. And the reality is that you're not going to perfectly connect with everybody. And there are going to be some situations and conversations that flow really naturally and feel really comfortable. And there are going to be some that feel a little bit more stilted and awkward. And that can be expected, but that doesn't mean that you're doing it incorrectly. One other thing that I often hear from trainees is that my experience and education should get me the job, not a connection. And I absolutely agree. And I, like everybody, really worry about nepotism happening within kind of job searches overall. But the truth of the matter is that companies and organizations are really getting slammed and inundated with applicants. And so sometimes your experience and your education might help you get through that initial filter, or it might not, because depending on computer filters or depending on referrals that might be needed, it can be really beneficial to have sort of an inside person kind of make that referral or pass along your resume as well. So just because of the volume that companies are getting, it is often the connection that is helping you to kind of get those first filters. And then the last one that I'll address that I often hear is I'm bothering someone if I'm asking for a meeting. And I would just really try to kind of put that out of your mind. I would say that most of the people that I have done informational interviews with and that I hear people doing informational interviews with are really flattered that someone wants to hear about their experience, to hear about their career path, and also remember what it was like to be in that position and in a role where you're trying to make career decisions. So I do think that a lot of times people really like speaking about themselves and kind of sharing their experiences. And if they're too busy or too overwhelmed, they'll just maybe not reply to your email, and no harm, no foul for trying. Okay, so now that I hopefully have encouraged you to kind of think about what might be stopping you from beginning networking, let's go into sort of how you can do this. What is an informational interview? So an informational interview is pretty self-explanatory and straightforward. It is usually a 20 to 60 minutes long meeting where you're simply asking a person questions about their job, about their career path, about sort of what got them to their current place in life. And really the purpose of an informational interview is really just that, is to gather information about the field, about the job. The only thing that you could do wrong within an informational interview is to explicitly ask for a job. So, within that, I really would encourage you to kind of, a lot of times people are going to kind of read between the lines that you're job searching or that you're kind of looking for a position. And so they might be able to kind of keep you in mind, but just try not to outright ask for a position. And I want to just highlight the resource that we have on this slide. So you're going to have access to all of the slides after the fact, after this presentation. But if you even just Google OITE informational interviews, you'll be able to see this come up. And it is a really great handout that actually has a lot of great informational interview questions listed as well. So make sure you check that out after. Okay, so another way to kind of think about framing your informational interviews would be along the lines of 4 goals. So let's put them all up. So present, so you're going to kind of ask the person to tell me about your current position. You're going to ask about their past, how you got into this field. Future, what do they see as some of the long-term opportunities within the field? And then finally, advice. And so advice can really run the range of contacts, feedback, professionals, societies, insights into possible positions. And so those are some things to kind of keep in mind of how you can frame your informational interview overall. But one of the biggest questions that I get from folks is really, what do I ask within an informational interview? And how do I start this? And so the OITE informational interview handout is something that you can easily reference and look to for questions that would be beneficial to ask within an informational interview. But I really want you to think about what's going to be important for you to find out. And so reflect on that and use this as sort of guidance and inspiration on what you can also bring into the informational interview. But starting with questions sort of about them personally is always a good way to begin. So you can ask them how they became interested in this field, how they began their career, what do they find the most rewarding about their work? Conversely, what is the most challenging aspect of their work? And then even just zeroing in on sort of the tasks. I think a very common question that's not listed on this slide is kind of walk me through a typical day. But I think it's nice to kind of even like zero in and ask more specific questions about what kind of problems do you typically deal with? What kind of decisions do you make? And then also I think it's really important for you to think about the work-life balance that's inherent within the job. So how does this job impact their lifestyle? Especially if that's going to be sort of a main career value to you. Reflecting on what your career values are and making sure that you're really asking questions that are going to kind of address that and that they're going to hopefully be able to kind of share some insights too. Then I would move into informational interview questions sort of about the field or about the job. So there are a lot of questions that you could ask. These are some of my favorites listed on this slide. So what skills, abilities, and personal attributes are essential to success in this job or field? And I think that's such a good question to ask because that's going to really help kind of inform what you should be, where you should be focusing on in terms of developing a skill set, and also what you should really be marketing within your job search documents as well. So sometimes the intel that you're gaining from your informational interviews helps to make you create and craft a more effective portfolio and job search documents as well. So along those lines, what is the profile of a person most recently hired at my level? And now this one is a question that I think a lot of people want to ask but aren't sure how to phrase it. So about kind of salary expectations. Now, first and foremost, make sure that you do not ask about the person's actual salary. That is just generally considered a rude question. And so don't necessarily go down that path. But I think that you can still try to get that information by asking, I've read that entry-level salary ranges for this field are usually in the range of X to Y. Does this fit with what you've actually seen? And that can be a way to kind of help you. And this is also another really great thing to ask within informational interviews because that's going to help give you insider information that hopefully will help you when it comes time to the salary negotiation phase. So yeah, that's a really good question to kind of have within your informational interview handout. Then finally, how would you describe the work environment and culture? And this is one that I think is another extremely important question to ask, and I would really highly encourage you to think about asking this question within your informational interviews, because I think that this is a question that a lot of people ask within an interview. So when you're actually interviewing for a job, and when it comes time for them to say, what questions do you have for us or for our team? And you say, oh yeah, how would you guys describe the work environment culture? And the answers that you're going to get when you're actually formally interviewing are going to be really polished and really professional and maybe not the most reflective or indicative of what the work culture actually is. But normally when you're doing informational interviews, people feel a little bit more comfortable to kind of share with you what that actually is. So make sure that this is a question that you ask, because I think that come interview time, this question tends to kind of be a little bit filtered out. And then finally, thinking about the job search in general. So good informational interview questions to ask would be about their experience job searching and what were the most effective strategies for them in seeking a position in this field. What ended up being successful for them? What was the key resource or action that they took in order to break into their field? You can always ask about recommendations that they have in terms of trade journals, magazines, professional associations that could help with your professional development. And like I noted before, but asking, are there any key skills that someone in this role should have? What are hiring managers really looking for? Are there any specific courses or experiences outside of the lab that would help make you more marketable for these comparable roles? And so I think those are all things that are really going to, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, give you that insider information in order to help give you a competitive edge when you're actually applying for positions. And then another question that I often like to ask are, kind of who do you see as your competitors? Or are there any other organizations that I should keep on my radar? Another way to ask this would be, when you were job searching, were you focused simply on this company, or were you looking at other organizations or other sectors, and why? Please tell me about that. And the reason that I think that's an important question to ask within an informational interview is that I'm constantly surprised at how many companies are out there that I didn't know about. And it's a really great way to kind of get a quick view of other companies that should sort of be on your radar and that you can be looking at for a position description or for available positions as well. So think about adding that to your list of informational interview questions as well. And then finally, the wrapping up sort of the informational interview questions, I think asking some kind of hindsight question. So this is often one of my favorite ways to kind of phrase this, but if you could do it all over again, would you choose the same path for yourself? If not, what would you change? So similarly with the job search, is there anything that you would have done differently within your job search? I think when you ask that question, you're really giving the person motivation to kind of reflect on their experience and to think about what didn't work well or what did work well. And I think it's anytime that I've asked this within informational interviews that I've done, I've always been really kind of pleasantly surprised at the insights that I've gained. And so definitely think about including this. And then finally, any general advice you can, that for someone trying to break into the field, or asking them sort of, given your career interests, is there anybody else that you would recommend that I speak to? And this is one of the most important final questions to really have within your informational interview, simply because the main goal with networking and informational interviews is to help you create a domino effect. And doing one informational interview is great. Doing 10, 20 is even better. And so if they do have a recommendation of somebody else that you could speak to that would be beneficial, and if you can even ask, would you be willing to make the introduction or make the contact for me, and see what they say. But I think that's a really great way to kind of ensure that that domino effect starts taking place. So informational interviews are, I mean, at the heart, they're really conversations, but they are professional conversations. So don't go into this informational interview feeling like you are interviewing for a job, right? It's not a job interview, but you still do need to prepare. And we do really want to make sure that you're coming across as kind of the most polished and professional version of yourself. So within that, you are going to need to be prepared to speak about yourself. And so many of you have probably heard about an elevator speech. Some people call it the 30-second commercial, but really it's the quick introduction to you and kind of answering one of the very first questions that you often get is, tell me about yourself. And so you're really going to want to give whoever you're doing an informational interview with a little bit of background about you. So who you are, where you work, what you do, and what you are looking for. And I put in bold what you are looking for, because obviously you're going to want to tailor that depending on who you are speaking to. But one of the things that I often hear is, I don't know what I want to do yet. And so I don't know what I'm looking for. And I don't think that you have to lie within the informational interview. You can simply say, I am still exploring my career options. I'm not really sure where I'm hoping to wind up. And that's really my motivation for doing informational interviews and for speaking with you today. I am thinking about these fields in particular, and you can list three, or just a few. And I encourage you to actually list a few and to try to be a little bit more specific about what those are. Because if you go into it and say, I'm looking for a position after my training at NIH, or I'm looking for a job after grad school, that's kind of going to go in one ear and out the other. And people aren't going to necessarily be able to kind of fit that into the framework when they see positions that might end up being a good fit for you. So try your best to be as specific as you can into what you are looking for. Now, one of the most common questions that I get is, should I bring my resume and CV to an informational interview? And a lot of times informational interviews do happen in real life. So like over coffee, meeting in person. That's not likely going to happen for the time being. And so most of the informational interviews that you're doing are going to be via phone or Zoom meetings or Skype or whatever it might be. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily as big of a concern about having a copy of your resume CV on hand. But I think that it's important to kind of go back to one of the principles of informational interviews, that this is purely about gathering information and it's not about asking for a job. So you can absolutely have a copy of your resume and CV on hand, but don't lead with it because it can come across as a tad too aggressive if you do so. I would say the same is true when you're emailing people for requests for informational interviews. You don't necessarily attach your resume CV on that first message to them. If they ask about it, absolutely provide it to them. You can, within an informational interview, and depending on how you feel like it's going with that person, you can ask for their feedback or their tips on your resume, CV, or key things that you should be including, and ask if they would be willing to review it. So you can see if they would be willing to do that, but try not to lead with it necessarily. Okay, so we are making our way through. Just as a reminder to those of you that have kind of recently logged in, I'm going to be looking at all of the questions after and doing my best to kind of go through and answer any of them. But finally, for our presentation today, how to set up an informational interview. So what does that process look like? So I really encourage you to kind of start with your inner circle. So think about the people that you know really well. So that could be, peers, your lab mates, your PI, any mentors or mentees within your life. That could also be sort of your family, your friends, your close colleagues, other close existing relationships. So really kind of that's your inner circle, that's your core group of people. And so start there and ask for recommendations of people. A lot of times this is referred to as the contact method, where you're asking people for advice and contacts on who you should be reaching out to. If that isn't necessarily providing you great leads, think about sort of expanding the next level of that circle. So professional acquaintances, maybe coworkers that you don't work super closely with, or former coworkers, your spouses, your partner's colleagues and coworkers, your friends. So who is your inner circle connected to? And those connections, that online, people that you meet at conferences, community events, people through professional associations, and then even connections from social media. I frequently work with trainees who are, avid social media users and have found that as a really great way to stay professionally connected. Twitter seems to be a really great way to actually stay professionally connected and to kind of even follow events and find new people to connect with. I would say that probably LinkedIn is considered the kind of penultimate site. So if you're not on LinkedIn, and especially if you're doing a non-academic job, I really encourage you to start a LinkedIn profile and start seeing how that could be a benefit to you and kind of finding people to connect with. But really, you're going to need to be a little bit resourceful and thinking about who you can connect with. And I really think that one of the biggest mistakes that people tend to make about thinking about contacts, well, first of all, a lot of times people will say to me, I want to go into this field and it's completely different from what I've done and I have absolutely no connections in that area. And so you're probably going to have to focus on number 3 and sort of those cold contacts and those far-reaching connections a little bit more than other people. And to sort of, again, normalize the process of networking, it is very, very common and very normal to reach out to people that you don't know at all. And so if you see somebody who's in an aspirational position by looking through LinkedIn, feel free to send them a message. The worst that could happen is they don't reply, or they say no, they don't have time to speak, and then you move on to the next person. But really, reaching out to cold contacts is something that happens quite frequently. And I think sometimes we need to get over our anxiety and our fears around that. And I think it's kind of an interesting phenomenon, because I think growing up, most people were told to kind of be leery of strangers. And, as a kid, you're told not to talk to strangers. And now as a professional adult, we say talk to strangers, talk to as many people as you can in order to kind of get that information and get the resources that you need. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing, and for those of you that tend to focus sort of on your inner circle and really stay within that number 1 phase and don't really branch out, is I really do see people kind of fall into this best friend syndrome. And the best friend syndrome to me is really relying on 1 or 2 or a few people to really make all of the professional connections in your life. And so a lot of times when I'm working with trainees, they'll say, I really expected my PI to do all of this. I really thought that my PI was going to help make connections for me or make introductions for me. And so really try not to fall into sort of that best friend syndrome and relying solely on one person. The best way to do this is to really have a wide variety of diverse career mentors if possible, and really as a way to kind of hopefully expand that network of yours. So one way that you can find people who you might not otherwise have a connection to and sort of falling in that third ring is really through alumni databases. So this is a screenshot of our NIH trainee alumni database. I recognize that maybe a lot of the people as attendees are not affiliated with the NIH. So if you are affiliated with the NIH, make sure that you're taking advantage of this and logging into the NIH alumni database and kind of going through and seeing who might be a good contact for you to reach out to. But if you're not at the NIH, definitely keep your schools in mind. So your universities, your undergraduate university, your graduate school, I guarantee they have an alumni network and an alumni database that you can tap into. So make sure that you're requesting access to those databases, and you can usually search by keyword. Everyone's a little different, but it's usually pretty straightforward in how you can search. And don't hesitate to reach out to people for informational interviews that you find within this. I think that people tend to be really great about responding to individuals who have some sort of shared affinity with them. So if you say, I found your contact information in the NIH alumni database, I'm currently a postdoc at the NIH, I'd love to hear about your role in XYZ. A lot of times people are more likely to reply just because of that kind of shared affinity. So starting with some of these kind of connections that you have, and it doesn't necessarily have to be institute databases. It could even be community service organizations that you're really involved in, or just communities in general, and thinking about those as ways to kind of tap into a larger network as well. So how can you go about kind of reaching out to cold contacts? So this is really a very basic email sample to cold contacts. And so there are a few things that you really need to make sure that you're doing within this outreach. And the very first one is really making it short. So really keeping it as quick as possible so that the person will actually read it. If you spend your first paragraph giving a bio of yourself or kind of a rundown of all of your accomplishments and experiences, I don't think people are going to make it to the second paragraph, especially if it is a cold contact. So don't feel like you have to kind of give this really thorough background about yourself. You're not necessarily reaching out to apply for a position at the lab or, seeing what that is. If you're just really reaching out for an informational interview, make sure that you're saying, 1, who you are, 2, how you found them, and 3, why you're contacting them. And really the reason why you're contacting them is for 20 minutes of their time to talk about their career. So this is the sample. Dear Dr. X, I'm currently a blank at X. I found your contact information through the NIH alumni database. I'm currently exploring career options in science policy and was hoping to get a little more information about how you navigated into your career. Do you have 20 minutes to spare for a telephone Zoom call? Thanks in advance. So really try to make it a very small lift for them. If you say 15 to 20 minutes, most people are willing to kind of, talk to you for 15 to 20 minutes. And so really make sure that it's a really small lift for them. I have also seen people, and this is something new, and I actually kind of like it, is also including, I would be available the following dates and times for a quick call. Please let me know if any of these work at your convenience. And the reason I think that actually might be nice is because if you're asking them for a call, the next step usually is they're going to have to go through their calendar, they're going to have to find windows and pockets of time, and then they're going to have to send that back to you, and then you're going to have to reply whether that works or not, and then it kind of turns into this big to-do and big back and forth. And sometimes I know, given how chaotic life feels, especially at the moment, it can feel like a lot of back and forth. And so if you kind of even just initially propose a few, maybe 3 to 4 dates and times, then they can quickly say, oh yeah, Monday at noon works for me. Feel free to give me a call for 15 minutes. So keep this in mind. This sample is also available in our OITE cover letter guide about kind of email contacts as well. Now, once you do your informational interview and you've gone through the steps of emailing to set up, and you've talked to the person and you've compiled all of your questions, please, please, please make sure that you are following up with the person. I do think that following up is one of the most overlooked and neglected parts of networking. So any contact that you have with a professional, and if you do informational interviews with folks, you should always follow up and email a thank you within 48 hours of speaking with them. And generally, you're going to want to try to maintain that connection as well. If they've offered to connect you to somebody, you can ask about making sure that connection is shared, or whether they've offered to review your resume. Those are all things that you can kind of use as means of following up. But the hard part about networking is really kind of maintaining these connections over the long term and finding ways to kind of nurture those connections. And I think a lot of this is going to be very dependent on sort of what your style is and your comfort level and ultimately the rapport that you had with that person. But look for really opportunities to kind of connect with them again, and to possibly even help them. If you see a career opportunity, a professional resource that might be of interest, or whether it's an article of interest, you could also kind of watch for them, update their updates on PubMed or ResearchGate. But even kind of connecting and reconnecting with them as a general hello, or at the new year or during the holidays, to just kind of check in with them, I think that is fine. I know that a lot of people have really sophisticated and elaborate systems for keeping track of their contacts. I've seen some really amazing spreadsheets that people have put together. I've also heard of people using sites like jibberjobber.com in order to kind of keep track of their contacts. And the last time that they reached out to them, whatever is going to work for you, but try to find kind of a system that's going to be beneficial. So a few final tips and resources, and then I'm going to kind of go through and spend the last about 10 to 15 minutes of our time going through and seeing what questions you all have. But final tips, really prepare and make sure that you're writing out your questions ahead of time. It's okay to kind of go into this having a list that you're referring to. It's more beneficial, and it actually kind of helps kind of focus the conversation and save time overall. Really, it's important to remember that this is about gathering information. It's not about selling yourself for a certain role. So listen more than you talk. And really, you're the one who's in charge. So respect their time. If they agree to a 20-minute phone call, make sure that you're really honoring that and really being the one to kind of wrap up the conversation. I think it's important to say, I recognize that you're very busy. I thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I don't want to take up any more of your time, and I've really appreciated this. So they're going to really value the fact that you were kind of taking the lead and honoring the time commitment that they offered. One thing that I think is often overlooked in terms of networking overall, and I often meet with people who are scheming and trying to find ways in order to get an informational interview with a high-level person or a person who's clearly in a hiring manager role. And I think that can be, it's absolutely great to do informational interviews with those folks and to kind of get their insights and their information. But don't overlook your peers and people who are kind of in the entry level or whatever level roles that you're hoping to kind of break into as well. The information that they give you can often be just as useful, sometimes even more beneficial. I remember I spoke to somebody who ended up talking to a CEO of a company and was so excited that they snagged this informational interview with them. And then when I followed up with them and heard about it, they said, actually, it was good, but it wasn't that helpful because this person was on the job market so many years ago, like decades ago, and really didn't even have great tips or advice for kind of how to break in. So sometimes people who are in these upper level kind of management and leadership roles are a little bit removed from the realities of a job search, sometimes at the level that you're at. And also sometimes the peer level networking is just a less stressful place to start, especially if you're anxious about this process or you don't feel super comfortable. And so this can be kind of a nice way to kind of break into and start practicing your informational interviews. As I just mentioned, always follow up with a thank you. And then I really encourage you to use your informational interviews to reflect on what you learned and to think, is this something that I would do well in? Is this a job that I'm still interested in? Is this a company that I want to learn more about? But really try not to overgeneralize based on one conversation. So most of you are scientists. You know that you shouldn't have an N of one. And a lot of times when I'm working with people, they'll say, oh, I met with this management consultant who seems so stressed out, and oh, I don't think that's the field for me, just based on one conversation. And that could be, not the right match for you because maybe they don't have the same personality or work style or work preferences. So really try not to base any major career decisions just simply on one conversation that you have, and really try to have sort of a robust overview as you're going through and doing informational interviews. So a few resources that I think are really helpful for you to kind of check out. First of all, we have a really great blog. It's open to the public, so it's available to people outside of the NIH, and you can really easily navigate and search it for resources that you're looking for. But two that I think will be helpful for networking and informational interviews in particular are using your networking map, and that link is there. And then also one of my colleagues wrote a really great post about how she overcame her fear of informational interviews, and I think it's really inspiring, especially if it's something that gives you a little bit of anxiety overall. Okay, so now I'm going to do my best, since I don't on my own here. So I'm going to try to go through all of your questions and answer them as I see them. And if I don't get to your question, then I will try to go through the list and follow up with you. Okay, so let's see. Yep, so all of the slides, as I mentioned, are going to be available to all of the attendees, and the recording will also be available at the link where you registered. So you should have access to all of it after the fact. So one of the questions is about career values and how those are really difficult to focus on and to evaluate. We have a lot of really great workshops that help you get to that. Planning for career satisfaction and success is one that I would really encourage you to view. If you just Google that, so planning for career satisfaction and success, OITE, you'll see the link to that. And that's a really great workshop to kind of go through thinking about how those career values are formed for you. If you are a trainee at the NIH, you can also make an appointment with a career counselor. So I'm one of 3 career counselors at the NIH, and you can make appointments with all of us online. And sometimes that's a really great one-on-one way to kind of help zero in on what's important to you in your career. So the question that I'm reading now is, do you specifically ask for an informational interview or a quick chat? I think the term informational interview is really widely recognized at this point. So I think you could feel very comfortable saying that you're requesting an informational interview. You could also just call it a conversation, whatever is better for you, but informational interview would be fine. So somebody has a question about the level of a person to informational interview. And like I noted at the end of the presentation, I do think it is really beneficial to kind of think about those peer level connections in terms of getting really good insights about career searches and resources specifically. They're probably not going to be in a position to be in a hiring manager role and kind of make that an eventual offer to you. So, you know, like anything, try to kind of keep it varied in who you're reaching out to and requesting informational interviews for. Okay, let's see what else. Yes, you can request informational interviews via LinkedIn. I see people do it all the time. One of the hard things about LinkedIn is sometimes you can't actually directly message somebody unless you're connected to them. So you could request the connection and then write a message to them and requesting the informational interview. So that can sometimes work as well. So yeah, absolutely feel free to send those requests via LinkedIn. Yeah, so somebody has a question about moving the conversation along. So for example, if your informational interviewee drones on for a very long time about maybe a topic that you're not super interested in, how do you kind of move it along? And I think it's okay. I mean, really, this is ultimately a conversation. So you can interject as long as it's kind of very respectful and polite, and ask a little bit more, follow-up questions or details about things that were a little bit unclear to you. So I think as long as you're approaching it in sort of a very tactful way, then it should be fine to do that. Okay, let's see what other questions come up. It's like, oh, this is a good one. I've not gotten this a lot. Is it common to audio record informational interviews? So I think if you're going to record anything, you really need to make sure that you get the person's permission first and foremost. I have had people ask me in appointments whether they could record just so that they remember everything we talked about and sort of the resources that I suggested. And normally I think that's fine. You can also, as sort of an alternative, take notes and just make sure that you're telling them that you're taking notes so that it doesn't seem kind of emissive as to what you're doing in terms of typing or writing. But I think as long as you are running everything by the person just to kind of get permission before you record anything is important. So the best way to, so some general questions about the NIH alumni database and the best way to search. So I think like any alumni database, you're going to find that people aren't super great about updating their contact information within alumni databases, including the NIH alumni database. And so you might need to use it in conjunction with LinkedIn in order to find their current contact information or where they're currently at. But when you're generally searching, try to keep it pretty broad and general in the beginning, and play around, because like any search engine, like even like Google, you're kind of it's trial and error of which keywords are going to be the right match. And so, you might want to kind of just keep it broad and general in the beginning and then narrow down from there. Okay, let's see. When is it appropriate? Okay, let's see. So some questions about when is it appropriate to ask for the referral or to kind of pass your resume along into a hiring manager. And I think that's a really hard question to answer, generally speaking, because I think it's very dependent on how that connection is going with that person and sort of your level of connection and rapport. But I think that it's okay to sort of ask and kind of evaluate how that connection is going. Again, like I mentioned, referrals are a lot of times actually beneficial for employees now. And so it might actually be something that they're very happy to do and to kind of pass it along. So there's really no harm in kind of asking. Okay, I have about 2 minutes. I'm going to try to go through some other questions. I'm going to scan and see if there are any themes emerging. So a lot of questions about how to kind of keep expanding your network. And hopefully that's going to kind of organically happen via the informational interviews that you're doing. I think, like I noted, that one of the best questions is really to ask about referrals and possible contacts that they could recommend that you reach out to. And that's really one of the best ways to kind of continue to expand your network. And there are some questions also about confusion about how this actually leads to a job. And I would say that this is probably one of the most common things that I hear, and one of the hesitations for people in starting the networking and informational interviewing process, simply because it is really vague and kind of ambiguous, and it's not clear how this is going to lead to a position. And that's a very common way to feel when you are networking. And I think it's why people sometimes shy away from doing it and focus simply on sort of the online postings that are tangible, that they can apply to, that they know that they might be able to get. And people who have successfully networked into their jobs often kind of look back in hindsight of how those dots were made and how those connections came to be. in order to kind of help them land into those positions. And so I would, try to keep the faith and try to keep going, and hopefully you're gaining some really great information that's going to help you create better job search documents overall, and market your skills more appropriately for different positions based on what you're learning in your informational interviews. But sometimes that sort of direct line of how this is going to lead you to that dream job is a little bit hazy, and until you're actually in that role. Okay, let me see. Any final questions that I can quickly answer? Okay, so I think that was the gist of it. If I didn't get to your question, I will try to follow up with you directly. But thank you all so much for your attention and your time today, and for logging into our webinar on informational interviews. I hope you all found it helpful, and happy networking. Please stay healthy and well, everyone. All right, take care. Bye-bye.